One is about the importance of investing in this community. I'm not here to give you a history lesson on the Ararat chapter. Adia Tukide. The history of East Carlton Street, the history of, I remember the first time I met Ararat Homenetmen, I went to your Broadway headquarters. And I had to step over people because it was that packed, right? The investment you make in this organization has profound dividends. And the one example I'll give is that in the early 1970s, there's a man, his name is Warren Buffett. He controls something known as Berkshire Hathaway, one of the more successful capitalist enterprises in the United States of America. He is referred commonly in the business world as the Oracle of Omaha. If you had invested $50,000 in the 1970s, that $50,000 would be worth millions today. He would pay an enormous dividend. And my first conclusion is that evidently, whether it was in 1978 or shortly thereafter, there were visionaries in this room, whether it's your parents or it's you or your grandparents, who raised $70,000. And in my mind, they're not the oracles of Omaha, they're the oracles of Glendon, right? They're the people who invested yesterday so we can have dividends today. And they're very wise people. And my last point is about the strength of the fabric of our community. And there's a story about a young man, his name was Ricky Robin, and he owned a boat, the Little Rick, in New Orleans in St. Bernard's Parish during Katrina. And he owned a 56-foot-long shrimp trawler. And when the hurricane hit, he took his boat and went into the bayou and connected it via a rope to a tree. And the storm came, and there were floods of anywhere between 8 to 21 feet. The wind speeds went up to 140 miles an hour. And many times during that night, he thought he was going to die, right? But he didn't die, because the strength of that rope that he had bound against that tree in that bayou in St. Bernard's Parish never broke. It never broke. And as my grandmother said, we are facing a challenge with our identity in the diaspora. It is difficult for some of the young folks against the back wall. It is difficult to maintain their identity. But we must tie our rope, our fabric, to that tree. And have the hope, have the faith, and make the investments that a prior generation had. And I'll conclude there and pass the baton to my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Այժմ Homenetmeni Ararat մասնաճյուղի սկաուտական բաժանմունքի Eagle Scout Matthews Տիրադուրյանը կներկայացնի Տիգրան Թովազեկյանին։
As an exemplary Armenian American, distinguished public servant, role model, mentor, and community leader, Sergeant Tigran Topazikyan is highly experienced, accomplished, and decorated peace officer who for over 2 decades now has served at various levels of law enforcement and has played a vital role in improving the quality of life in communities in which he has served and touched the lives of many he has come in contact with. Though in professional aspects, Sergeant Topazikyan's professional and personal accomplishments are impressive even amongst the most seasoned veteran law enforcement officials. Sergeant Tigran Topazikyan has 14 years experience as a police sergeant, detective, and police officer, and an additional 6 years combined experience as a reserve police officer, police cadet, and police explorer. He is also trilingual in Armenian, English, and Spanish languages. Sergeant Tigran Tovazikian holds a master's degree in public administration from Cal State University Northridge and a Bachelor of Science degree in business administration with an option organizational systems management from Cal State University Northridge. Because of his accomplishments and experience, Sergeant Tigran Tovazikian was invited by the U.S. Embassy to participate in an anti-corruption training for Armenian law enforcement. Sergeant Tigran Tovazikian also actively engaged in and involved in his community through public speaking events, television appearances, and participated in Armenian National Peace Officers Association, Glendale Police Explorer Post 104, Police Achieve, Project Achieve, Cops for Kids, and a long-range planning facilitator for the city of Glendale. Now I'd like to welcome Sergeant Tigran Tovazikian.
Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be here today. Truly, I feel it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for coming to this event. I'm truly honored to, one, be presenting, and two, to be associating with my colleagues. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. What I want to talk about is how I was born an Armenian. Back to our roots, we all have stories about the Armenian genocide, but it wasn't until the information age where I ran my father's name on Google where I found out the story. During the New York Life settlement, the Daily News had solicited a quote from my father, and I was touched to know about the story. Unfortunately, I had to find out, from the internet, because I believe it would have been so painful for him to share, but nonetheless, I got to know. Well, my great-grandparents from my father's side, they lived in old Armenia during the Ottoman Empire and were exiled. And there were 8 children that my great-grandparents had. And throughout the journey to the lands where now considered Syria, my great-grandparents had to bury 6 of their own children with their hands. Fortunately, a couple of people survived. They survived and got to go and live in Greece, where my grandmother was born, who later gave birth to my father, who later married my mother. Despite the story about the birds and the bees, and they told me some stork had dropped me off, now I know, how I truly came about. And I was born in Yerevan, Armenia, in 1975. When I was 5 years old, we made the journey, 3 generations, grandparents, parents, and my generation. 16 of us took the journey from Armenia by train, where we landed in Moscow. And we left the spelling of our last name, Tovazikian, to the U.S. Embassy employee who was standing or sitting behind the desk, deciding the fate of how my last name was going to be spelled. That's why I get joked upon. The people ask me if I want to buy, a vowel, because so many consonants go together, and the word Tovazikian. But to this day, I maintain it. I'm very proud of it. And after receiving our paperwork, got on the plane, went through New York, and eventually landed in Los Angeles in 1980. As somebody that didn't know any English, where English was my second language, the journey of my life truly began here in Hollywood, and then 2 years later, and into present time through Glendale. I remember going to an elementary school in Los Angeles where my first day they had a meal with some cornbread and something that was packaged in some plastic. I opened up the plastic, and now I know it was ketchup, but at that time, coming from Armenia as a kid, not knowing what ketchup was or what a red substance was, I put it on my cornbread, decided to eat it. People were looking very funnily at me, all those kids next to me saying, what the heck is this crazy kid doing? Later on, somebody pulled me aside and said, hey, the ketchup was for your hamburger. So after a couple years in Los Angeles, I was fortunate enough to join the Cub Scouts, where I did a couple years in the Cub Scouts. We got to move to the great community of Glendale, where I went through the public school system all the way up through high school. But I wasn't one of those kids that went to public school Monday through Friday and that was it. On Saturdays, my parents enrolled me in Armenian school. I went to Alex Philippos for about 10 years, and that's where I picked up my Armenian language, my writing and reading skills, and I thank my parents to this day for that. While I was in high school, or just before in junior high, in school in Glendale, I got to meet my current boss and someone that I currently give gray hair to, Lieutenant Fox. He was a school resource officer. He approached me and asked, hey, do you want to go out and ride along with the police officers? And my childhood dream was to become a police officer, and I took upon the invitation. That's where my journey into my career began, aside from my education, or in addition to. I became a volunteer. I became a Police Explorer Scout, a function and a program of the Boy Scouts of America, where 4.5 years I would continue to volunteer and go to school at the same time, moving on to be an intern as a police cadet in college while I was going through Cal State Northridge and trying to get my education. Something that my parents, my grandparents, and my closest family members pushed me to do. Out of 8 cousins, I was the first one that achieved a college education. And after that, my brother followed and some of my younger cousins followed. Now, why was this important? Why is this important? I feel that there's a solution or a formula as to why we maintain our identities as Armenians and why Armenians become successful throughout their life. One is we have parents that are committed to us, parents that are committed to their children. But that comes with a price. At times, as parents, we always want to see the best in our children, and we'll fail to recognize the danger signs of when someone is going sideways. Fortunately, I had the investments of my parents to this day, where every day that I see them, in Armenian, I say Barev Mam, Barev Bab, and I give them a kiss. To my surviving grandparents, every time I see them, my aunts and uncles, family is very important, and the values that they've instilled in me have now translated into my goals, into my career. Secondly is the education. There are a lot of smart people sitting in the audience. There are people that are going to be more successful than I am. There are people that are more successful than I am. But it was something that was pushed upon me by my parents, telling me that they can take everything away, but they can never take away your knowledge. And for that reason, I stuck, through school, got my bachelor's degree, and then continued on to get my master's degree while I was employed at the police department. I had mentors in the Explorer program, in my volunteer program, mentors such as Lieutenant Fox, Lieutenant Rick Young, and some of the other police officers where they believed in me. Now, I know Homenetmen has a lot of volunteers, and I just want to say thank you to you because you believe in the programs and the people that you are investing your time for them to become successful, or hope that they would become successful in the future. If we don't have the people out there that volunteer, that contribute, that donate, it becomes a lot harder for people like me to have some.